tonight. Hello, everyone. It's 7:30. It's good to see you all. I'm noticing that there's a little bit of lag and a little bit of jerkiness going on. You might as well in some of the video or audio. If you have your video on, let's try it again this week to turn your video off. And we'll see if that helps clear up a little bit of this. And David Brooks is here tonight. I'm going to talk with us a little bit about Carmen and the legal impacts of the opera in that era, and and what that might look like today if we were faced with the same kind of thing. I've known David a long time. He and his wife Jean play cello in the orchestra at American River College, and have been doing that far longer than I've been there. And they're just an anchor for the group, and a pleasure to have around. And so when I was putting this together, he was the first person I thought of as a great contributor. David wrote a book a few years ago, and David, I looked around for mine today and remembered I left it in my office at the college. So if you have it there, it would be great. You can show it to us. And it's all kinds of stories. I think they were bedtime stories, weren't they? Is that what? Yeah. And that he would tell his friends. You could tell us about your book later on. It's great. A really great read. And it's all about different cases and characters that he's met up through the foothills and Forest Hill. So if you haven't seen David's bio, this is a little bit of it. 35 years defending criminal cases, and he's defended many homicide cases, and he's experienced to provide death penalty defense, which is appropriate here for our discussion tonight. Many dozens of jury trials, forensic sciences and his expertise in mental health defenses and mitigation, and he's the man to know. And he writes at the end of his bio, he says, prior to the commission of a felony, please call before rather than after when possible. So if any of you have thoughts along those lines, he's the person to contact, I suppose. And so I'm going to let David take it here a bit. I'm going to ask some questions maybe during the course of this as a somewhat of an interview, or just to maybe have some discussion going on. Those of you who might like a little extra credit tonight, if you'd like to feed me some questions that you're interested in, I'll have my chat up, and you can just, if you know how to use that chat feature, I'm sure you all do, you can write your questions there. And if you're in my classes and I choose one of your questions, then I'll give you a few extra points for doing that. And I'll keep an eye on what you guys have to say as he's talking here. At some point during the lecture tonight, I will give you a code, and you will enter that code into the box provided on the Canvas site if you are an enrolled student, and that will be the way that you get credit for being here tonight. And so before we start, does anybody have any questions or anything that I can address for you with that? All right. Well, good. So please thumbs up or snap your fingers in the beatnik fashion for David Brooks.
Thank you, sir.
Welcome, David.
Thanks. So
we're going to talk about Carmen tonight through the eyes of an attorney, and I suppose an attorney who might be representing either Carmen herself or Don Jose, who does the deed there at the end of the opera. And so I can't wait to hear what you have to tell us about that.
Well, so I'm going to, in fact, get to that. I'm going to start with some legal definitions that are kind of summaries of what the law is, so that we all have a common language. Because it turns out there's a tremendous number of ways to kill somebody. we end up having to look at a series of actions and determine exactly what that was. Was it murder? There's two kinds of murder. Was it a manslaughter? Or is it possible that we've got a total defense to the crime? So I went through the libretto and I tried to identify all the criminal conduct that I could and probably caught it all. And then after I give some basic definitions, we'll take a look at the opera and apply them. So if anybody needs to get in touch with me about anything, one way to do that is through my website. It's callbrookslaw.com. And there's contact information. I've got bio in there. Hello, Kat. And I've got everything but a good sangria recipe. And since we're talking about Carmen, if anybody needs one, I've got a couple of good ones. So let's go to the first slide here.
I put that in chat, by the way. So anybody who needs that, callbrookslaw.com.
That way you don't have to chase after me on the internet. So the first thing I took a look at was the definition of murder. And there's actually three of those. And the first one is first-degree murder with special circumstances. And a special circumstance means that there's special facts in the case and there's a list of possibilities. And if you get anything that's on that list, you're now eligible for life without possibility of parole or the death penalty. And that includes the concept of lying in wait. If you lie in wait and then kill somebody, that's a special circumstance. And I put that on there because in the final act, Don Jose shows up at the bullfight. Okay, so there's some possibility that he's hanging around there thinking about killing Carmen. And if the facts point to that, in California, he's got a serious problem because this is now an elevated punishment kind of a murder. In order to be guilty of murder in the first degree, you've got to have a triple threat. It's got to be willful, it's got to be deliberate, and you have to premeditate. And if you don't have all three of those, it's not a first degree murder. First degree murder in California carries 25 to life in prison. So each of these things have got a definition. Willful means you have to intend to kill. Deliberate means that you have to weigh the consequences for and against. And the premeditation means you have to decide to do the killing. So this weighing of whether I should or whether I shouldn't, there's no particular period of time. That can happen in an instant, or it might happen over a long period of time. But if you've got those three things, that's murder first. So if you've got a killing that is rash, compulsive, without careful consideration, you're talking about something other than murder in the first, because it's not going to be deliberate and it's not going to be premeditated. So there's this other kind of murder called murder in the second. And it's possible that with enough provocation, sometimes known as heat of passion, that first degree murder can get reduced to second degree murder, because that great provocation can result in a reasonable doubt regarding the elements of deliberation and premeditation, but you could still have malice aforethought. Malice aforethought is defined as a willful and wanton act in conscious disregard for human life. So provocation comes in handy because, for a defense lawyer, because it can turn a first-degree murder into a second-degree murder, and second-degree murder reduces the punishment to 15 to life. The punishment starts coming down. And the other thing about provocation, as we'll see, is it can make it not a murder at all and can turn it into a manslaughter sometimes. And a manslaughter carries a lot less punishment. So there's a heavily armed Don Jose. So in the definition of manslaughter, it says that a killing in the heat of passion or sudden quarrel, if provoked, and as a result, the defendant acted rashly and acted under the influence of intense emotion that obscured reasoning or judgment. And, so you got to have both. The provocation caused an average person to act rashly and without deliberation, meaning that somebody reacted in passion rather than deliberation. And that average person needs to be provoked to act rashly, not provoked to kill. Then, manslaughter is going to apply, but not if there's a cooling off period. And again, this is the average, standard, ordinary person. So this concept of an average person is very solid in modern law. At the time of Carmen and Don Jose, far less so. These days, we've got this concept of a modified objective third-person standard for all the English majors. And what that means is when you're determining whether the provocation is sufficient, when you're determining whether the reaction is appropriate, the average person, the juror, stands in the shoes of the defendant. And in that modified position, then asks themselves, would I have done that? Does that seem reasonable to me? So in a manslaughter defense, the DA has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that it's not heat of passion. So the DA, the prosecutor, is going to be arguing for one of the murder counts. But if we can argue that it's reasonable that a heat of passion created a mental state consistent with the definition of manslaughter, then that's sufficient to win that battle. So I found this case named Borchers from 1958, and it's an important one for Don Jose because it says that the infidelity of a lover is sufficient provocation to get to a manslaughter. So what that case means is Don Jose gets out of the starting blocks. It doesn't mean he wins, but it means that his defense theory is valid if he decides that he's got to go to trial and try to beat a murder charge. The heat of passion that we're talking about is any high-wrought emotion. It doesn't just have to be anger. It doesn't just have to be jealousy. The provocation can be verbal, but only if that average person would have acted rashly if they had heard it. The defendant who first threatens violence loses the right to argue that they were provoked. And this could be a big problem for Don Jose under California law. So ultimately what this is all going to go to is how to kill your lover and maybe get away with it. Maybe get away with it's got kind of a lawyer's definition. If somebody's charged with murder and that's not what happens, you had a good day in court. It doesn't always mean walking away from the offense. It might mean arguing for the lesser offense. So, a little history. So, this concept of provocation goes way back, and it's entirely misogynistic and based on property rights of men that own their women. So I started in ancient Rome, and in ancient Rome, it was flat not a crime to kill under certain circumstances.
Kind of.
Somebody's got an open mic, I think. So if your wife was fooling around, you can kill her. And you can kill the man who's fooling around with her. And if your daughter becomes sexually active, you may kill your daughter. And you can kill your daughter's lover. So that's where all this kind of starts. So then in Italy, we've got this modified concept where they say, well, you're not going to be guilty under certain circumstances, but they're going to be limited. And they're based on a paternal notion of really property rights, the ownership of the spouse. So I was curious how long these kinds of attitudes stuck around. And I found in France, they've historically had a crime based on provocation. It's called crime passionnel. And it's entirely based on paternal authority. It gets you a 2-year sentence for killing your wife. And it was on the books into the 70s. I was curious about the Middle East because they get a lot of criticism for having paternalistic laws. And I wanted to compare them against what was happening in Europe. And I found out that most of the Middle East countries adopted their penal codes from the French code. So in fact, the Middle East paternalistic, misogynistic laws are European based. And it all started in Europe. I found out that even today in Uruguay, if you've got a homicide where a wife is killed as a result of being caught in the act of adultery, you get a pass. You're welcome to kill your wife. The English look like they probably first codified this defense of provocation. It's been in their code for a really long time. The crime is tied to adultery within the marriage, and it's based on, again, property rights to women. And then there's this concept of women being viewed as prone to uncontrolled emotions, and as a result of these emotions, they commit crimes of passion, and that creates an inability for them to premeditate. And there's lots and lots of historic murders by women that result in not guilty verdicts, absolutely contrary to the evidence, because historically they were viewed as just not up to the job. So whatever happened, that couldn't have happened. So this is kind of a list of crimes in Carmen. So in the first act, Carmen is fighting with a fellow factory worker. And she ain't talking. If it were modern times, she'd be taking the fifth. She's asked what happened, and her response, I think the quote is, tra la 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 la. It's what she had to say about it. And the next crime, it's also in the first act. Don Jose would appear to be aiding an escape. So he gets into kind of a conspiracy with Carmen that he's going to be pushed, and that creates a distraction. So Carmen bails off a bridge. And then as the second act starts, Don Jose is with Carmen, and which raises the possibility that he's now an accessory after the fact and helping her in her continued escape. We've got Don Jose absent without leave. He's a dragoon. He's in the army. And at the beginning of the second act, he's left the stockade. He's been down for 2 months, and he takes off with Carmen. So, especially in that era, this could be a big problem. Deserting might get him dead. So then we've got Don Jose continuing to be an accessory after the fact. It looks like he's with her at the gypsy camp. They're still on the run. Then Don Jose's just kind of goes for it. He's kind of quite the crime spree. So he does an assault with a deadly weapon, personal use of a firearm, might be attempted murder. So he's at the gypsy camp, and the bullfighter approaches the camp trying to hang out with Carmen. And Don Jose fires a shot, and it goes through the hat of the bullfighter. So it's a close call, and there's dialogue about, hey, that was a close call. So shooting at somebody without much of a reason, who's probably in the murky dark, is probably going to be some kind of crime. And at best, I think that's going to be an assault with a deadly weapon. But it's possible that it's worse than that. Second-degree murder in California, willful and wanton disregard for human life. Yeah, it sounds like it might be that. Or he might have just been trying to kill him and he missed, which is attempted first degree. And then at the end, Don Jose kills Carmen, and we go into an analysis about whether that is murder versus manslaughter, which is why I gave the definitions at the top. So, Carmen.
Hey,
So,
David,
yeah,
we got a couple of questions here already, so I'm just going to pose a couple to you right now,
sure.
and not to throw you off your game.
Not a problem.
But, all right.
Unflappable.
Well, there are several who want to know if a cheating husband, either in that era or this era, would fall into the same kinds of rules.
Not that I found. It's the laws were entirely misogynistic and oriented towards allowing men to kill women. Women were not allowed to kill men. Probably had something to do with the fact that they weren't any part of the judicial process, and the guys making the rules probably wanted to sleep at night.
Yeah. Did you find any kind of punishment for women who might have killed a cheating husband, or?
Yeah, I didn't actually. What I did find were women who killed that weren't their husbands, that got found not guilty for no particularly good reason. A couple of examples well after Carmen. Everybody will remember Lizzie Borden. Took an axe, gave her mother 40 whacks. Well, she got found not guilty. That was a not guilty verdict, unanimous. There was no evidence that she didn't do that. The defense was, she's female and she's not capable, you can't convict her. And that won. Shortly after Lizzie's trial, she ran off with the family's nanny and traveled the world on steamships for the rest of her life. Fun fact.
Yeah, so there was some difference in the way they treated.
And another example is Madame Calais, French case, about 1917, I think it was. A Parisian newspaper was writing hit pieces about Madame Calais's husband. He'd apparently been up to some financial shenanigans and found himself in the local newspaper. The wife went down to the paper, found the publisher with the objective of talking him out of publishing. He told her to buzz off, and so she murdered him. She got found not guilty on the basis that she was female. She's simply not capable of a premeditated murder, genetically incapable of it.
Does that defense work today?
Absolutely not.
Everybody.
But that having been said, it's been my experience that a female defendant sometimes has a leg up in a murder case. The jury is more willing to find reasons that they had a good reason to do it. They're more open to the idea of lesser offenses. They're more open to the idea that you've got a complete factual defense. And so there is definitely a sex bias, but it's more helping women who are on trial than hurting them, in my view. It's not universally true, but I'm thinking back on a few of the cases that I've done where women were, they killed for very understandable reasons. They killed because I had to kill my mother because she was adopting a baby and she'd torture that baby just like she tortured me. Or I had to kill the guy because I know he was molesting my child and I went to court and I couldn't stop it any other way. And I just couldn't let the molestations go on. And if you wouldn't get to make those arguments effectively if you had a male on trial. So it makes a difference.
Oh. Yeah. We have another question too that's kind of interesting. What if Carmen's boyfriend Escondido, the bullfighter, had caught Don Jose in the act, and he had killed him, the bullfighter killed the soldier.
So
what would that qualify under the rankings of different kinds of murder?
So the problem you're going to have, both modernly and in the time of Carmen, is the laws were really oriented to men being allowed to kill their wives as a result of this notion of property interest. It's the greatest violation that property could have. And in that hypothetical, you don't really have that in play. So now, why did the bullfighter kill Don Jose? Because remember, we're talking different kinds of intent. So within the libretto, what would the heat of passion be? He's the former boyfriend, and he knew he was the former boyfriend when he started his relationship with Carmen. So I don't see how you could argue first is really a second, or the first is really a manslaughter, because you don't have the high wrought emotion at the time of the killing. It sounds more premeditated. I don't like the cut of your jib. You shot me in the hat, and now I'm going to kill you. That sounds like a premeditated murder to me.
I see. But if he was caught if he caught Don Jose in the act of trying
then
to,
you now have high wrought emotion, You
Yeah.
don't have what I've been able to identify as the law of the time exactly to help you with a non-crime. So you're hoping that you can save your client by arguing to that heat of passion, trying to, go to the California jury instructions that we do know quite well, and that are based on various histories, and trying to argue that that heat of passion created a rash act, a lack of deliberation, no premeditation. It's not a murder. So now it's a manslaughter.
Mm.
But he's not going to walk on it.
How about kids? How about children? Do you find any treatment of how children were looked at? If
Not historically. I can speak to it modernly for sure. I've represented lots of kids who've killed. They usually have really crazy facts, involve children who have been significantly abused and who are victims in many ways. And then they will sometimes rise up and take out the abuser. But there's lots of different possibilities. I've had really weird cases where it turned out the kid didn't do it. He was trying to take the fall for the mother who is trying to rake in the insurance money. And he decided to help his mom out. We were able to figure that one out, and that turned out to be a not guilty. So, kids kill for all kinds of reasons. And then you've got gang crimes, and that's a whole different thing. The analysis of a gang crime is kind of hard to do because it doesn't make a lot of sense. It's a lot about I got disrespected, and so of course I had to kill him. And these kids think that way, and it's legitimate, but it doesn't stand up to a rational analysis. Now, what was happening back then, most of the time, if you got caught killing somebody, you're going to get hung. And in the countries that I am familiar with, like England, they didn't make many distinctions about how old you were. They had no big problem hanging a kid. So I guess you'd be in the same sort of position. If so, did the kid do it for a reason that I can argue it just wasn't a murder by definition?
Mm-hmm.
Was it premeditated? Was it deliberate? Or was it something that came from inside in a rage that wasn't thought about, just happened? It's always hard to do legal analysis going back in time, especially with Carmen. Spain in that era kept changing its mind about whether it wanted to have a constitution. And about every 4 years, they'd go back to a monarchy. So constitution, monarchy, constitution, monarchy. And so what are the rules of procedure? Do you even have rights? I mean, you'd have to narrow it down to a pretty tight time frame to determine that. And the way Bizet wrote the opera, I can't tell you what year it happened. In fact, there's things in it that I've taken a look at trying to figure that out. Like, so Don Jose's in the Dragoons. So what's a dragoon? Well, it turns out that a dragoon is a soldier who's mounted. He's cavalry, but he's also infantry. So they teach them how to shoot with a rifle, and they carry a handgun, and he's got a saber. So they're like an all-in-one Swiss Army knife of a soldier. But the dragoons fell out of fashion in the early 1800s and are no more. So Don Jose is a member of a military organization that hasn't existed for decades. On one of the photos I've got, Don Jose is wearing a yellow uniform coat. And yellow was, in fact, the color of the dragoons. They wore yellow with a kind of a baby blue facing on the front of the jacket. But those jackets hadn't been worn for decades. So it's when I was trying to figure out exactly what year is this, to try to figure out whether you've even got rights, I couldn't do it. He's got too many factually inaccurate things in the opera to be able to date it.
Yeah, I think, I read it was supposed to be set in 1820. But
I've read that.
French.
I think the dragoons went away, I don't know, it was like 1810, something like that. And then they turned them into hussars, which is a form of cavalry.
I think a lot of the opera was the French impression of what Spanish people were like, and what gypsies, Roma, were like, and that actually.
Yep, I think we lost you, Steve. Oh, did I freeze?
No, there's
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I got you now.
Yeah. So there's a question here about how the Roma were treated. Did you see any court proceedings or anything that had to do with?
What I know about the Roma is they were uniformly treated badly. They were definitely second-class citizens, and the factory work that Carmen was engaged in was not exactly socially desirable. Women weren't supposed to smoke cigarettes at all. And I see her in various operas, she's smoking cigarettes and cigars. And so she is definitely counterculture. The Romani were viewed as thieves. In the part of the opera where the group is up in the mountains and they're hiding out, so they're painted as highway robbers and folks that are not to be trusted, to be avoided, and you take your chances. And when a curious fellow came up to have a word with Carmen, he got a bullet in the hat. So that's all kind of consistent. The view of the Romani in Europe was pretty consistent with that for a really long time. And when I lived in Europe in the 70s, I would say the views hadn't changed much. But it was also true that the Romani were making a living outside the culture. They were picking pockets and working as groups, and they were little kids that they'd send out to go steal things, and the kids would get punished if they didn't bring it back. I witnessed all that. It's a really insulated culture that's been pretty intact for a long time. And they've got a lot of interesting traditions. I've represented a a number of Romani through the years on some fairly serious cases. And I remember one where it was part of the case where somebody was in the hospital and they were Romani and they were severely injured and very likely to die. And the community came around and did kind of grieved as a group. And then the person died and everybody left. And a nurse slugged a fellow in the head with a bedpan because he popped out from under the bed and had been hiding under there. And apparently there's a tradition that you want to get under the dying person. It has something to do with being able to take in their spirit and take advantage of that. So it's they're folk with some very strong traditions. But as far as the rest of society goes, they're not going to fit in, and they didn't fit in Carmen's time. And
so would punishments be harsher for Romani if you in court cases? Were there court cases that you saw or have seen?
Well, it was pretty harsh for Carmen. You know, so what did she do? So the libretto says that she was in the factory working and she got into a verbal dispute with a factory worker. And the women who work in the factory are singing in two choruses. And one of the choruses is talking about how this fight just went down. And they say that the other woman told Carmen that she needed to mount a donkey to be more royal. But the mounting didn't mean to ride it. And furthermore, there were going to be two children following behind, keeping the flies off as best they can. This puts Carmen in a rage, and in the libretto, there's hair pulling that goes on. I found another version where there's a stabbing that happens. And you and I talked a while ago, I can remember some version where something more than a stabbing happened. I thought that she killed the other woman in that version. But in the libretto, what happens is there's some hair pulling. So the officer who's in charge of the garrison is trying to get Carmen to spill the beans about what's going on. She won't say anything. So he arrests her and is in the process of taking her to jail. So he hasn't figured out whether she committed a crime. He hasn't figured out whether she's gonna be prosecuted for something. She basically goes to jail because she's got a bad attitude. And she says tra-la-la when he tries to find out what happened. And I also wondered how much jealousy plays in, because it looks like, at least watching that character in the opera, that he's got an interest in these women and he's not getting the attention. And so I also noted that Don Jose gets jailed for 2 months, but what do they know he did? He fell down. That's what he did. And he's in jail for 2 months. So that's why I was thinking maybe jealousy. But it struck me that Carmen was not being treated with due process, that's for sure. But I'm not sure anybody was then. You know, the guy's got power. He's allowed to wield it as he sees fit. There's nobody over him that's a check that can make him behave. So maybe everybody just gets treated poorly. But Carmen for sure got treated badly. For sure she's Romany. Maybe that played in.
Yeah. It's interesting how it's set in different places. And the book, Kate has just said, she's slashed in the face with an X. And of course, she's a little more than hair pulling. But depending upon how the opera is set, it's an interesting scenario. I had another question here about our soldier. So, what would have happened in a military court? We have a soldier who's AWOL and under investigation.
In that era, they might have just shot him.
Yeah.
I mean, that's probably the easiest thing to do. There wasn't a lot of due process involved. And your fate depended a lot on what your superior officer decided was going to happen to you. Modernly, there's a uniform code of military justice that is very different than the court system, but provides you a form of due process. It's really a different sort of a proceeding in a lot of ways, but it does give you a forum to present your case. But back then, I'm thinking they wouldn't have been very nice to him. So this one's just about, we've already covered a whole lot of this, but so if Carmen had been prosecuted, there's not a lot in the opera to show that for sure she's guilty of something. But of course, it depends on which opera you want to pay attention to. There's so many different versions of this. Does Carmen need a makeover? So what every defense lawyer knows is that when you've got a client, you need to present them as one of us and not one of them. So the jury's got to be able to identify and look at and see their sister or their sister, their girlfriend, their wife. They've got to see somebody that they recognize. And we know the truth of that in the cases of Callot and Lizzie Borden, as a for instance. They basically got presented as quiet, cultured, articulate, submissive. They were part of the culture, and that's why they got a break. If you bring somebody to a trial and they're viewed as one of them, you got a problem. So I think Carmen, maybe if she had to go to court, she's gonna need a little makeover. She's gonna require some practice on how to behave and how to respond, about how to not come off as, well, who she probably really is, at least according to Bizet's version. But she would do better if she were something else. So, list of Don Jose's crimes. So we've talked about accessory after the fact and the attempted escape and the AWOL, the shot through the hat. And then he goes on for a while about how he was a law-abiding fellow, but now he's a criminal and he's in the gypsy camp. So I was wondering whether Bizet was inferring that while he was up in the mountains, he was misbehaving with the gypsies. So then the big one, Don Jose kills Carmen. So now, is it murder? Is it second-degree murder? Is it manslaughter? So we've got all these definitions, and you apply them and try to figure out exactly what he's guilty of. And I've got a real concern about the libretto when he's talking to Carmen and she's talking back, and he's talking about how she needs to come away with him, and she's saying that certainly won't happen, and she's quite firm about it. There's this concept of a cooling off period. The more they talk about it, the more it seems like he's not acting in a heat of passion. It's part of his deliberation. Should I? Shouldn't I? It starts to look more like murder. But there could be a proof problem, because I don't know that there's any witnesses to this conversation. And one person knows, but she's dead. So now, is Don Jose going to spill the beans on himself? Or like Carmen, is he going to be quiet and not provide information? If he doesn't provide information, that conversation may never be part of the evidence because there's nobody to present it. So it's a little hard to tell whether at the end of this, he's going to have a shot at a manslaughter conviction. But I can't rule it out. And it might well be the only defense he's got, because all of the examples that I cited earlier that involved it's just not a crime to kill the female in your life, it all applies to marital relationships and a property interest. He doesn't have one of those. So I don't think he's got the historical defenses available. And a jury's, if you were in a time that gave you the right to have a jury, is going to have to make a decision about whether he was so overwrought with emotion that he lacked the capacity to deliberate. So in that voluntary manslaughter analysis, we know that the heat of passion can reduce murder to a manslaughter. We've got this issue about the conversation, but no witnesses. Assume Don Jose keeps his mouth shut. Something that is relevant, including modernly, is Don Jose is talking about his sense of honor when he's singing about the dragoons and what the dragoons stand for. So he's basically wrapping himself in honor. That does not help you with voluntary manslaughter modernly. There are a number of cases that talk about things like, well, he's a Vietnam veteran, and so his sense of honor is so much higher that it makes sense that we're talking about a voluntary manslaughter. Now, you can't do that. Modernly, it's an average person standard. It doesn't matter if you were a soldier. It does an average person in those shoes with that have that extreme emotional reaction. Obviously, the motive is a lover's rejection. Good news for Don Jose. So I think if you put all that together, if it all comes out just right for him, he's got a realistic chance of arguing to the jury that this was a voluntary manslaughter. And remember that the defense only has to show that the people have to show beyond a reasonable doubt that it wasn't a voluntary manslaughter. So you've got some advantage in that argument. And then the last thing I put is a modern convention. So modernly, you've got a right to present expert witnesses to support your case. And you can call a forensic psychologist who can testify that the state of mind will be described in the following way. I'm going to look at all the facts. I'm going to interview Don Jose. I'm going to try to reach a conclusion about whether all these things together could potentially result in a voluntary manslaughter, because that's the correct state of mind. There's lots of obstacles to this and technical legal problems, but it's something that defense attorneys do in one form or another pretty often. No doubt not in Don Jose's time, because, well, they didn't have forensic psychologists. So that's a modern thing. So that is that. And I'm trying to stop the share. There we go. And Steve froze. My goodness. That could be.
Open the chat. Click on the button. There you go.
I don't know where the box is.
You're good.
So it's not, I'm out.
Ask him.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
You're here? Okay. So that's my analysis of what I thought of the primary crimes in Carmen. A lot of the historical stuff's hard because unless you're a hardcore historian with a legal focus, I'm not sure it's easy to acquire a lot of that information. But I did what I could.
Awesome. Yeah, it was a lot of great information there, David. By the way, everyone, your code for tonight is Carmelita cookies. Carmelita cookies.
Carmelita cookies.
That is what you will put in the box when you get to.
I opened up the chat to see what else is going on here.
Excuse me, Professor, can you repeat that?
Put it in the chat.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yes. I captured many of these questions, but maybe I missed. Is there anybody that has a question for David?
I've seen a couple here. Yuri was asking, how would Don Jose be punished in the United States, including his military status in our time? So, yeah, so that would be Uniform Code of Military Justice. He'd have a court-martial. And modernly, they're not going to kill him. That's for sure. They might demote him. He might spend a little more time in the stockade. He already spent 2 months, so he's probably not going to spend less. So maybe he does another 4 months in the stockade, comes out with a demotion. And if he's been naughty enough, they might possibly give him a dishonorable discharge, which means that he won't be getting his VA benefits. He won't have his medical benefits. He won't have his education benefits.
My computer's running really slow.
It's okay.
Access is not doing so well.
There's some questions in here about kid versus kid crime. I'm not sure I understand the question fully. But if anybody's got a specific question about that, I'd be happy to answer it. I do juvenile law.
Okay. Thank you very much, David.
You're welcome. Have a lovely evening.
Yeah. A big clap of hands and snapping of fingers.
I posted a question that I'm really interested to get the answer on, Mr. Brooks, if you don't mind.
I don't.
So I've always been curious about, you know, what the benefit or I guess I don't find the sense in executing a prisoner that has already pretty much served their entire life in prison. Like, I just don't.
There's a lot of people that would agree with you, and there's probably a lot of people that would disagree with you. So we're talking about the concept of capital punishment. And I've got my own personal views on the morality of that. And there's lots of people that disagree with me. Well, I think is uncontroverted about capital punishment is it costs a lot of money and takes forever. It takes so long that modernly, unless somebody volunteers, it's not realistic that somebody would live long enough to be executed in the state of California because of what's involved in the appellate process and how long it takes to do that. So what we've got is a system in the state where getting the death penalty versus not has a lot to do with which side of the hallway you're going to be housed on, and not much more than that. There's a strong economic argument that that killing inmates is obsolete, that it just doesn't make any sense anymore. And the argument on the other side is, yes, we agree, but it's excellent politically. It advances careers, does all kinds of things, but it literally, it's on which side of the hallway you'd like to house somebody. Death penalty timelines are crazy. The trials take years because of all the things that are involved. They're really expensive to do because of all the things that are involved. It takes 6, maybe 8 years to get your very first appellate attorney post-conviction, because there aren't any. There are so few lawyers with the credentials that they can't get representation. They finally get a lawyer, and the lawyer is shown a room that's about 12 by 12 stacked with boxes, solid, all the way to the ceiling, side to side, bottom to top. And they're told, there's your record on your mark, get set, go. So the review of this takes years. It takes so long that it often takes longer than the appellate attorney will be alive, because these are usually experienced retired attorneys who are older. So if the attorney expires, then new attorney's got to come in, start all over again. And that's just for the first state appeal. They go all the way up. There's federal appeals. The process lasts longer than people do. So the leading cause of death on death row is old age, except for right now. Right now, the leading cause of death on death row is COVID, followed second by old age, third by suicide. So I'm agreeing with you. It doesn't make a lot of sense, and I don't have to argue the morality of it. As a result, the death penalty is very seldom used in California, and more as a political maneuver, and then they change their mind after a while.
Thank you for that.
Sure. Anybody else?
Okay, David, thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Yes, it was wonderful. Appreciate your time and especially all the research that you did. I know it took a lot out of your day to put that all together.
You've got another chat request for your class code.
Well, it's in there.
Scroll up. It was Carmelita cookies.
That's right.
I'm not even in the class.
Not too hard to remember.
Well,
What is a Carmelita cookie?
it's called.
What is a Carmelita cookie?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
What? Just apply.
Carmelita has brown sugar, chocolate chips, caramel filling, quick oats, and eggs. How about that?
That sounds like the best of all worlds.
There you go. We'll do a cooking one. How to make Carmelita cookies. Okay, good. I think next time we're together is September 30th, for those of you who are still here. And we have Ana Maria Mendieta doing a presentation on Spanish music. And Bizet was very influenced by Spanish music. So we'll hear about what a habanera is and about flamenco and so on. A seguidilla. Okay, good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Dr. Thompson, I have a question.
Who is this? Oh,
Anna,
Anna. Hi, Anna.
hi. Where do we submit the code?
It'll be on your Canvas site. I need to put the box up there on yours.
Oh, okay.
Your class is the only one that I missed, but I'll have that up there for you tonight.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Hello, Paul. These might be all the people who went to get coffee. All right. Good night to everybody who's still here.